Hello book nerds, it's Amanda, and if you're new, welcome to my channel, and if you're not, welcome back. Today I'm going to be doing a review of The Hunchback of Notre Dame by Victor Hugo. I have been meaning to read this book for forever, and I finally I did it. I read this. First of all, I would like to say that I absolutely loved this book. I gave it 5 stars. It's about Quasimodo, who is born deformed. He has like a giant wart over an eye, so he really only has one eye that he can see out of. He has one leg that's shorter than another, and then he has a humped back. And he is the adoptive son of the Archdeacon Claude Frollo, who is an archdeacon and who is the antagonist of the story. Also have Esmeralda, who is a gypsy girl. I think she's 16 or 15 in the book. And then you have Captain Phoebus, captain of the guards, and he's just a guard. Now, first off, the book is nothing like the Disney movie, like at all. Nothing like the Disney movie. And I'm going to list you the differences. First off, I'm pretty sure in the Disney movie, Frollo is a judge, not part of the church. But in the book, he's an archdeacon, which I think is high up. I'm not Catholic, so I don't really know exactly the hierarchy, but I think he's second to the Bishop of Paris, I think, in Notre Dame. Correct me on that if you guys know, but I'm pretty sure he's second to the bishop. And he has a younger brother who plays like kind of an important secondary role. He's important to Frollo's character development, but he's not in the movie at all. Another big difference is that Quasimodo is not this sort of lovesick giant, like a kind, lumbering sort of giant. He's not like this little schoolboy character that he's portrayed as in the movie. He's actually really, really scary, kind of. He's pretty aggressive. Esmeralda is not this older, mature woman. She is a very young girl. I would not consider her a woman. Like if she's like 15 or 16, so she's pretty young, and she is really, really naive. One of the big parts about her storyline is that she does not know who her mother is, but I'll get back to that later. Anyway, so she's super duper naive, and she falls in love with Captain Phoebus. And Phoebus is not this like super funny, witty sun god that he was in the Disney movie. He's actually a total Chad. And if you guys don't know what a Chad is, I'm here to explain that to you. A Chad is a guy who is super attractive and who knows that they're super attractive and is one of those people who who's like hit it and quit it, you know? Where you find them on like inside fraternities all the time, where they just kind of like hook up with you and then they just leave, you know? Yeah. So he kind of sucks. He's a jerk, and I hate him. So basically, this story is just basically about all the different love attachments that all the different characters have with each other, and just the type of like problems it causes. Esmeralda is in love with Phoebus. Phoebus is kind of in love with himself. He's not really in love with anybody. He's just out to have a good time, and he just wants to bang the prettiest girl that he sees and then move and find the next girl. And then you have Frollo, who falls in love with Esmeralda, and Quasimodo also kind of falls in love with Esmeralda. And it's basically just how all of that works. Esmeralda being a gypsy, she's linked to magic and to the occult. They talk about Sabbath a lot and just sorcery in general, which I guess would make sense considering when they're explaining the Court of Miracles, which is basically where all of the other gypsies, and not just gypsies, they call themselves the truants, and that's just all the thieves and just the bad people there. They basically have that like scene where the blind can see and the lame can walk, where they paint on these like really, really gross wounds on themselves. They make themselves look like they're crippled when they're not. so that they can get money. So coming from like that bad background, it makes it hard for her to have a respectable sort of relationship with really anybody. So with Frollo, one of the big things about his character is that he is not the sort of like plainly evil character that he is in the movie. He's actually very complex. Him and Quasimodo were probably the most complex characters in the entire book, and I really, really enjoyed reading it because you can't just look at him and say, oh yeah, he's a bad guy. I mean, obviously he's a bad guy, but I think that things are a lot more complicated than that. You have, he basically, from a young age, was sent away to college to become educated, and he was super duper smart, and he was just like moving on right up through college and was getting ready to join the clergy when his parents died. When his parents died, he was left with the care of his young brother Yehan. I think that's how you pronounce it. And he just completely falls in love with his brother. From that point, he really didn't have any emotional attachments to his family since he never really saw them. He was in love with learning and he was in love with school. But after becoming the guardian of Yehan, he just absolutely fell in love with him, and he had this idea that there's nothing that this kid can do wrong, and I have to protect this kid and like just throughout everything, like no matter what. And that's really how he ended up adopting Quasimodo. Quasimodo was left out on the streets for other people to just pick up. It was this kind of like charity thing where if you wanted to adopt a kid, these people would just like leave kids that they didn't want, like I think in front of the church, so that other people could just pick it up and adopt it if they wanted to, which is really, really weird and was not very nice. But Frollo ended up finding him in front of the streets, and all these like people were making fun of Quasimodo and just didn't look like them, and obviously they're very superstitious back in this time period, and they were just like, oh, he must be like devil spawn or something like that. So anyway, Frollo ends up picking him up and adopting him as a surrogate son, and he does that in order to make this sort of like deal with God, I guess, that for this good act of adopting like somebody that nobody else wanted, he wanted those like, I guess like good Samaritan points to be put into his brother Yehan's like bank account, if that makes sense. So when Yehan dies and he is, you know, judged before the eyes of God, if he's found wanting, well then the like good act that Frollo did by adopting Quasimodo can then be like put into the balance so that Yehan comes off a little bit better. It doesn't make any sense, but that's how he was thinking. Yeah, but he instates Quasimodo to become the bell ringer of Notre Dame because obviously he has a high up position, as I already talked about. He was the archdeacon, and so Quasimodo becomes the bell ringer, and then he becomes deaf because those bells are really freaking loud. But he is absolutely in love with these bells. These bells are the only things that he can hear now because he's deaf, and I can't even do justice to the way that Victor Hugo explains it. Honestly, I really recommend just reading that passage. It's just so beautiful. So when Frollo comes upon Esmeralda, he is convinced that she is like a witch because she stirred up these like feelings for him that he hadn't really had before. I mean, not to say that he was never attracted to anybody before, but he was always able to, I guess, like take control of his mind again, you know, mind over matter. But with Esmeralda, he couldn't. He was just super duper entranced with her. And he just like couldn't get her out of his head. But Esmeralda, being the little like 15-year-old pretty girl that she is, she fell in love with Phoebus, who rescued her one night. And she just fell in love with him because he was good looking. That's really it. I have no idea like why. He doesn't even like her. At one point in the book, he was just trying to get into her pants and was being like, she asked him, do you love me? And he's like, oh yeah, you're like, I totally love you. You're the most beautiful person ever. And she's like, oh, when are we gonna get married? And he's like, why do we need to get married? Like, we don't need to get married. And it was just so like, I was like, girl, come on. Like, we don't need that, okay? Oh my gosh, I hated it so much. I hate Phoebus. He is just the worst character ever. And he didn't deserve her. I didn't particularly like Esmeralda either, but whatever. So that's basically what the book is about. It's just about everybody liking somebody who is not really good for them. And it just causes a lot of problems. Yeah, another thing that I wanted to mention that was like pretty big in this book that is not in the movie is that there's this whole little like subplot about Esmeralda's mother, who was called Paquette le Chatefleur, I don't know, something like that. I'm just gonna call her Paquette. But Paquette was basically this really, really beautiful young girl back in the town of Reims. And I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, it's probably Reims. But she was this beautiful young girl in the town of Reims, and call her like a woman of like pleasure or something, where basically she wasn't like a prostitute, she's like a courtesan, I guess, where she would just have different lovers and they would give her gifts and whatever. And basically that doesn't last very long because obviously you don't stay young and beautiful forever. But when she gets, so her life wasn't super duper happy because originally you start off with someone who's like very high up and who's in a very good position, but then as you get older and older, it just gets like lower and lower, and then you get less and less things, and then you start to get hungry. And so she started to get hungry and like was suffering when because she was feeling like unloved. Nobody was really sticking around very long. So she prayed to God for a child, and God gave her a beautiful little daughter who she named Agnes. Well, one day a group of gypsies came over and they were having like a carnival or something like right outside of town, and everybody went over there to hear their fortunes read. I think they're specifically getting like their palms read or something. And the gypsies would tell these people like, oh, you're going to be king, or you're going to marry very, very rich. They were basically telling them anything that they wanted to hear. And so Paquette wanted to take her little daughter Agnes to see what the gypsies had to say, because there had never been a more beautiful baby than Agnes. Paquette absolutely like doted on Agnes and got her these like really, really cute little shoes, because something they talked about a lot was how like what beautiful feet this baby had. I guess this baby had the most beautiful feet ever. I never look at people's feet, but this baby had beautiful feet. And so she took these babies to the gypsies, and the gypsies were like, wow, you have a very beautiful child. Your child will be an empress. And Paquette's like, oh my gosh, that's so great. She goes home, she leaves the baby in bed because the baby is sleeping, and she goes out to go tell a neighbor what the gypsies told her about her daughter, how she's going to be an empress. While she's gone, the gypsies came in and they stole the baby and only left one of the little baby's shoes. And that was kind of in the baby's place. They left who we later learn is Quasimodo. And so Paquette is the person who left Quasimodo outside of the church steps. And I thought that was really, really interesting. That was something that I was thinking about a lot, that Quasimodo was really like the surrogate for almost everything. He was used as a sort of like moral like equalizer for all the good that Frollo did by raising him. It was meant to like equal out Jehan's like badness, like because he wasn't like the best. He like drank a lot, he was always broke, he spent money, he played dice. So he was like meant to like temper out, like by this good deed he was meant to temper out all of Jehan's bad deeds. But he was also used as a surrogate to Esmeralda, for like the taking of Esmeralda, otherwise known as Agnes. And I just found that really, really interesting. It was something that I thought about a lot while I was reading the book, was how I guess these characters could have been foils for each other in some way, shape, or form, because obviously they're very, very connected, and more than just the sense that Quasimodo ended up falling in love with Esmeralda, but that they were connected, like even when they were children. I particularly love the way that Victor Hugo made Quasimodo's character, I think that his character was very complex. Right, so I ended up comparing him a lot to Eric from the Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux, and it's a lot because both men were disfigured. They were really hated by society for the way that they looked. They were considered like demons, and there was this one like really, really beautiful passage that was in the book where they were talking about how that was in The Hunchback of Notre Dame, where they were talking about how if you grow up and all you get is like the badness of society, where all they do is give you hate, it's no wonder that you're going to become a hateful person. It's no wonder that you caught it. It's all that you know. And that was like really, really shown in both characters. I think that with Eric, it's obviously a little bit different because he was an absolute genius and he still had a beautiful voice in which he was able to connect with other people. Quasimodo really didn't have that because he was deaf. He really couldn't get into the world of others because he really didn't talk much. He couldn't really talk much because he couldn't really hear. And so that was something that was hard. But even then, I think that like he had a good nature, like deep down. He didn't have to be evil. It's just kind of something that society made him become. I feel like you could really see like how tormented he was by how ugly he was and how he felt because he was ugly, he was undeserving of love. But it was something that he wanted desperately. He wanted to be like everybody else. In the same sense, I also ended up comparing him sometimes to Frankenstein's monster. Again, I think that Frankenstein's monster ended up being a smarter character, but he had this sort of eternal problem too, because if you look at the relationship between Frankenstein and his monster, it was kind of non-existent, which was kind of similar between Quasimodo and Claude Frollo. Claude Frollo, even though he was like an adoptive parent, he was never really like a parent. He was more of a master, and that's how Quasimodo kind of referred to him as, was master. His position to Frollo was always subservient and was always like one has power, the other doesn't, which, you know, obviously isn't very good, but that's just the way that that was just their dynamic. Overall, I really, really loved this book. I think that it was absolutely beautifully written. The parts where there was like plot going and just like the story was just so beautiful and it was just so rich, and I absolutely fell in love with it. Like, I love it so much. I actually can't wait to read it again. I'm like thinking about reading it again. It was so beautiful. The plot was just so well intertwined. All the subplots were like amazing. They were just so beautifully thought out. My only complaint was that Victor Hugo would sometimes go off on tangents where we would get chapters of, to me, really, really boring stuff. And it wasn't like it was bad. I would get the point of the chapter, but then there would still be like 20 pages after I figured out what the point was, and it was just really, really stupid, in my opinion. It just wasn't for me. Like, there would be a chapter talking just about the architecture of the Notre Dame, but it wasn't even just the architecture of Notre Dame. It was how we used to tell stories and how architecture used to be used to make a political statement, which was really, really interesting. But then it would just keep going. Like, it would just talk about like every little like facet of every different pillar, and I just thought it was entirely unnecessary. And so I finished that chapter being like, wow, oh my goodness, I can't believe, like, I'm done, I finished it, I can move back into the story. Nope, because then we go into 30 pages of the layout of Paris, which was really boring. And I am still not sure what the point of those 30 pages was. It was just a waste of my time. But if we are taking out all of those little boring bits, this was a fantastic book and I absolutely loved it. I feel kind of weird for giving it a 5-star review. when I thought that there were chunks of it that were really, really boring and that I really hated. But the story was so beautiful. I absolutely love the story. I love the plot, and it's my opinion. It's my opinion! So I'm gonna give it 5 stars. Yep, and that was my review on the Hunchback of Notre Dame. If you liked it, please give it a like. Please consider subscribing, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!